Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to help you digest the big running back news of the week. Of course, I'm talking about Damian Williams to the right now. Let's go in order, Jared, of the announced signings from a big Monday to start this week. And first up is Ezekiel Elliott going to the Patriots. $4 million one-year deal with incentives that can take it up to $6 million. I haven't seen what those specific incentives are yet to know how easy they are to hit, to know how good a chance it is of being a $6 million contract. But I do follow at Smola DS on Twitter, what used to be Twitter, and he told me that this is, quote, the best case scenario for Rhamondre Stevenson. So I want to ask him why that is.
Listen, you got to be a little hot takey on Twitter, right? I didn't mean the best case. I meant the best case of all, relatively likely. Because it's been clear for a while now that the Patriots were going to add something. And I think it was, is it going to be Zeke? Is it going to be Leonard Fournette? Is it going to be Dalvin Cook? Is it going to be Kareem Hunt? I think all four of those guys were possibilities. I think among those four, I think Zeke was the best case for Stevenson's fantasy value. Definitely better than Dalvin Cook and Leonard Fournette. I think you could argue Zeke versus Kareem Hunt. But, I mean, listen, Zeke is a big name. He's probably a future Hall of Famer. I don't know. I'm bad deciding whether guys should be in the Hall of Fame. But he's had a great career, real life and fantasy. He is no longer anything better than a league average running back. Just look at what he did last year. 3.8 yards per carry for Zeke last year, career low. 43rd among 48 qualifiers in rush yards over expected per attempt. That's a NFL Next Gen stats stat. Career lows in catches, yards per catch, yards per route. He just doesn't have much left in the tank. I think the Zeke signing, as I've been saying for a while, I think is much more about the lack of options behind Rhamondre Stevenson. Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris have shown nothing in the spring or in training camp. Neither guy was good in the preseason opener. I think the Patriots realized they needed something else behind Rhamondre Stevenson. And since our rankings have been released, we've had these, other carries distributed to Patriots running backs behind Rhamondre Stevenson. So what we mostly did with the projections was just move most of those carries to Ezekiel Elliott. We did chop a little, like 10 or 15 carries off of Stevenson's projections. We chopped about, I think, a half touchdown off of his projections. I do think Zeke could be a threat at the goal line for Stevenson. That's probably the biggest impact here. But really, for me, and I think you're on board with that, Stevenson moved down a little bit, but I don't think this is a big hit to his fantasy value.
Yeah, for me, this really depends on what the market does with the reaction to this. I will agree with you that Zeke is a better case scenario than either Leonard Fournette, who would probably be in for more receiving than Zeke will get, or Dalvin Cook, who I think has more left than Zeke does. So I think in that case, it's a good signing. I do think that you might still be a little bit light on the impact of Zeke, though, because of what they're paying him. Like I said, at least $4 million. That's $3 million in salary, $1 million in bonus. It could be up to $6 million. When I looked on Spot Track, they're treating it like $6 million. So I don't know if they know more about the incentives than I do. Either way, Zeke either tied Jamal Williams for the fourth highest annual average among running back contracts on the market this year, or he's tied with David Montgomery for third if you give him the full incentives and make this a $6 million deal. It's at least double what Damian Harris got in Buffalo. If he gets the full value, it's more than triple what Damian Harris got from the Bills and lots of other running backs who signed early on this market. So to me, the amount of money that they're giving Zeke Elliott and the fact that he decided to sign now when there's still almost a month until everybody's season start, there are probably going to be some running back injuries, some other teams that are in maybe even more desperate situations. That to me says that the Patriots believe Zeke has something left, and that they have promised, at the very least, an opportunity to fill a significant role here. We'll see what he does with that once he gets those touches. But I think we're looking at more than just a Rhamondre Stevenson handcuff. I think we're going to see somebody that's regularly involved in the offense, not somebody that I want to start in a fantasy lineup, and not a player that I'm excited about. So if Stevenson slips into round 4 on average, I'm fine with him in that range. If he stays in round 3, I'm not sure yet because the market's still reacting. There are lots of other running backs also still available in that range. And, we're going to get to more, but there are lots of running backs taking hits still in that range on their value that are just, tough to evaluate. That's probably going to move wide receivers around in that range. So I'm going to have to get a few more drafts under my belt here before I really know where I feel comfortable taking Rhamondre Stevenson. I know that in the first best ball draft I did after these two signings, we're going to get to the other one next, I took Joe Mixon and Travis Etienne right ahead of Rhamondre Stevenson. I don't know that I would make those picks every time, or even the most out of those selections. I do know I like Joe Mixon best among those three. I'm still kind of evaluating Etienne versus Stevenson.
Yeah, I will be in on Stevenson in round 4. And I think, near that 3-4 turn is where I'd start to consider him, because I do think he belongs right there with Mixon. I still prefer Stevenson, at least in full PPR, to Etienne, even Najee Harris. So Stevenson last year, he finished what? He finished RB8 in PPR points. He was even RB11 in half PPR. That came on 12.4 carries per game, and he only scored 5 rushing touchdowns. So again, he can lose 6 to 8 carries per game to Zeke. He can lose some goal line work to Zeke, but if he maintains at least something close to the receiving role he had last year, which I still feel pretty good about, I still think Stevenson can kind of finish in that RB10 to RB12 range.
Yeah, and especially with a camp that has not featured much positive news on Patriots pass catchers other than Hunter Henry, who has a limited ceiling, and Demario Douglas, who is a day 3 rookie, so we don't really know what to expect from him right away. That, I think, has all certainly helped the upside for Stevenson. So I don't want to be out on him, maybe a little bit more wary than I was a week ago or even 2 days ago. Dalvin Cook to the Jets was the other big signing for even more money than what Zeke is getting in New England, the highest average annual value. It's a 1-year deal, so that's not as much a commitment as a 3-year deal for Miles Sanders, for example, but it is the highest single-year average of any running back on this market. Jared, what should we do with that, combined with Breece Hall now being activated from the PUP list today as we speak?
Yeah, this money was surprising that Dalvin Cook got as much as he did. $7 million guaranteed. It can be worth up to $8.6 million with incentives. I do got to say though, and I've obviously never been in an NFL front office, so I don't know for sure. But with the Dalvin Cook signing and the Ezekiel Elliott signing, I do think the money means less this time of year, because if you have cap space, what else are you going to do with it, right? If the if the Jets see a need. And by the way, I do think Aaron Rodgers played a big role in this Dalvin Cook signing. He had taken a pay cut about a couple of weeks ago to free up some cap space. I do think Rodgers wanted Dalvin Cook, and I do think that matters. It's clear, but with the money and the other moves the Jets have made at running back, and they've been sniffing around a bunch of free agents, they obviously want to take it easy on Breece Hall for at least part of the season. So that's the first takeaway here. I even think Dalvin Cook probably opens the season as a better fantasy play than Breece Hall. We'll see about Dalvin Cook's health too, though. I mean, he's still recovering from that February shoulder surgery. Adam Schefter reported yesterday that Cook is still about, I think the quote was at least a week away. At least a week away from being able to practice. So, Breece Hall is beating Dalvin Cook to the practice field for the Jets. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. Obviously, this caps Breece Hall's upside. It's also going to lower his ADP, though. I'm curious to see where he lands. I think, we said, fourth round for Stevenson. For me, if Breece Hall starts getting into the 5th round with those guys like Alexander Madison and Cam Akers and Miles Sanders, the Breece Hall archetype is different than those guys. I think those guys are all safer bets, especially to open the season in terms of volume. But I still think Breece Hall beats those guys on upside, especially when you're getting to the back half of the season as he gets, 12 plus months removed from that ACL. I still think Hall has the highest ceiling among running backs that I think are going to be going in that round, 5-6 range.
I would say if we're talking about full PPR, I'm not even sure those other guys are safer, because Breece Hall at the very least should be involved as a receiver. He's a better receiver than Dalvin Cook, and they've been saying all along that they expect him to be ready for the regular season. So I would think that we should get something similar to what Breece Hall and Michael Carter were doing together in the backfield last year, which included a lot of receiving early on. I mean, those numbers were inflated because they threw a ton of passes over the first 3 games with Joe Flacco. And, obviously this is a different offense with some other new guys in addition to Aaron Rodgers. So I don't want to get too far into that one, but I think there's, Breece Hall's okay in that round 5 range. And if we start comparing him to players such as Alexander Madison and Miles Sanders, who had a hamstring or groin, I can't remember at the moment, but either way, there's that risk with Miles Sanders going in. So I think round 5, Breece Hall gets interesting. I haven't been interested in him to this point because I think all signs have pointed to being cautious. And yet the market has been like, well, round 3, Breece Hall is cautious. He was RB 10 or 11. I never thought that was cautious. Was it below what his ceiling could be? Sure. But I didn't think it was cautious. So if we get him into round 5, I think that is now cautious enough where I'm interested. Still not a smash pick for me, given the other guys that we're looking at, especially outside of running back. Like that's the round where I like to get Justin Herbert plenty of times, or maybe even Darren Waller late in round 5 at this point, because he's been climbing. So in the mix for sure, not a smash pick. I do think that what they're paying Dalvin Cook and the fact that it's Dalvin Cook and not somebody else, especially that they paid him that with his shoulder not being ready, that tells me that they're not worried about the shoulder. And that tells me that they expect quite a bit from Dalvin Cook whenever he does get back on the field. So it looks like a bit of a murky backfield situation, certainly one that's going to be tough early in the season, because I don't know that we're going to feel great about starting Dalvin Cook in week 1.
Yeah, there's questions on the Jets offensive line too, and I think it's mostly at the tackle spots, which might matter a bit less for the running game than the pass protection. So that's worth keeping in mind. We'll see where Dalvin Cook's ADP settles now. He actually moved down our rankings a couple spots with the updated projections. I think his ADP is probably going to climb from where it was. So I'm expecting to pretty much be out on Dalvin Cook now.
Yeah, and if he does climb, I agree with that. He's been in the 30s. He's in the 30s in our rankings, and I think that's where he belongs. I think landing with the Jets does cap his ceiling. There is probably very nice contingent upside here. So if he doesn't climb, and if you can get him in the mid-30s, I think Dalvin Cook is a fine RB3 and a nice RB4, but we'll see what the market does. And, we're all so quick to react to this and say where guys belong. It really depends a lot on what the market says. If guys fall further than we expect, all of a sudden a guy who was an iffy pick before could be a smash pick a week later. So we'll certainly be watching that. Now, this was just going to be a running back video, but then the Colts announced that Anthony Richardson is the regular season starter. That's not a shock. It seemed like they were building towards that really ever since the draft, where they said, no, don't expect him to necessarily sit the bench right away. Yeah. So it's official now. We don't have to speculate. Now, Jared, Richardson has already been QB 11 in underdog ADP. He's QB 13 in recent FFPC main event ADP. I think it's easy to see how he makes sense in a tournament format where all the ceiling outcomes are even more important because you're trying to beat a large field. So I guess the better question is not how much of an upside guy is he, because we can all see that with the rushing, but what about single league? Are you taking a different approach with Anthony Richardson there than you are in a tournament?
Yeah, Richardson also, by the way, is quarterback 16 in our, standard ADP on the site, which I think is, less of these tournaments that I think do tend to be sharper. So as you get into your home leagues, I do think you might be able to get Richardson, well outside the top 12 quarterbacks. And I definitely think he's worth it. He's going to be in the mix ADP wise, I think, still with guys like Dak Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa. And I do think those are the type of guys we should be comparing him to. And again, I talked about, the scoring archetype stuff with Breece Hall. And it's the same thing with Richardson. Like your Dak Prescott, I think especially, is going to be such a safer season-long bet, and even probably a safer weekly bet. I mean, Richardson's rushing ability is going to raise his weekly floor, but I still think there's going to be some ugly passing performances from him. But if you want to talk about upside, both season-long and weekly, then I think Richardson beats Dak Prescott pretty handily. So again, you have to kind of think about who fits best for the type of league you're in, the type of format you're in. I think it's a case where if you draft Richardson, you're going to want to take another quarterback probably within the next few rounds to sort of pair with him. Probably early in the season, you might not want to be throwing Richardson out there. But I mean, you talk about ceiling, like Justin Fields 2022 is in Richardson's range of outcomes, right? Like the passing production wasn't great, but he runs for 1,100 yards and however many touchdowns Fields has, and he ends up as, top 6 or 7 fantasy quarterback. That's possible for Anthony Richardson. So again, if you can get that at, quarterback 12 or, quarterback 13, 14, I think it's definitely worth the gamble in most cases.
Has there been anybody as close to Cam Newton in the draft as Anthony Richardson? I mean, we had 1 full year of starter work in college, so we don't really know what we're getting, but we've got huge rushing upside. He averaged 54.5 rushing yards per game last year with sack yardage taken out. So that's just what college stats do. So that would be a great number for a rookie quarterback. And then anything on top of that passing wise would certainly be nice. On top of the rushing though, he threw downfield a lot and well in college. So we're combining 2 high upside areas in Anthony Richardson's game. He's much better equipped than most quarterbacks to be very good in fantasy without being very good in real life. If he is just, like all over the place consistency wise, he can still be a good fantasy quarterback for us. If people remember Vince Young, like he had a bad rookie season. He had more interceptions than touchdown passes. He had less than 15 touchdown passes. He was still a top 12 fantasy quarterback that year, despite not starting the opening of that season. So I think Anthony Richardson is still a good guy to get as a low end QB1 in your lineup setting leagues. And then, like you said, take another quarterback soon after that. We're going to get a couple of spots that you can start Richardson right at the beginning of the season. They play the Texans in week 2. They're home against the Jaguars in week 1. So I would feel okay going ahead and starting Richardson right away, having an insurance guy on my roster. And if we get like real bad games from Richardson in either or both of those first 2 weeks, then go ahead and move off of him. You know, put him on your bench, start somebody else. It's not going to be hard in most leagues to find a replacement, even if you don't end up drafting one, but it's also not hard to go ahead and draft that insurance. Somebody even like Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins is slipping into that range. Like you could get Richardson and then come back and take Cousins with your next pick or the one after that. Cousins would be a great insurance policy because he also has top 8 upside. So I like Richardson outside of tournaments even. I think he makes plenty of sense for a single league because like we both said, the upside is into the top 6.
Yeah, I think Cousins and Geno Smith are affordable, guys to pair with Richardson. Yeah, I mean, you brought up Cam Newton. He finished quarterback 4 as a rookie. You brought up Vince Young. He was quarterback 12 as a rookie. And by the way, one last thing on Richardson, I think if the Jonathan Taylor thing, if the holdout bleeds into the regular season or if he ends up getting traded or whatever happens, like that's bad for the Colts offense in general, but I think it might help Richardson's fantasy. I think it would make the Colts an even more, Richardson centric offense in terms of, both throwing the ball and him carrying the ball. So we'll see where the JT situation goes. But at minimum, I don't think, Taylor missing regular season games would be bad news for Richardson's fantasy value.
And there's also a chance that Taylor is still actually working back from that ankle surgery he had in the offseason. We want to believe that it's just the contract holdout, but maybe there is some fire to that smoke about the ankle stuff. At the very least, that's one other risk factor on Taylor's plate. So yeah, there's more rushing touchdown upside, I think, if Jonathan Taylor misses any time. We have, of course, updated all of the rankings for all these situations we've talked about. The fantasy football rankings are always up to date on draftsharks.com. We do that throughout the week. We do that especially when news breaks, when injuries happen, but even also just in reaction to revelations from preseason play so far, new info that we come across just as we're writing articles or watching, or even just how we draft. If we just find that I'm never targeting this quarterback where he comes up on our draft board, we discuss that as a group and it's like, oh, turns out everybody's doing that. I guess we should move them down the ranks. So we're always making changes like that. You will always get the most up-to-date projections in your draft war room. Click your screen right now to get ready for your draft.